So we're here again doing a midweek podcast with Michael Hughes, Joshua Cutchin, and Red Pill Junkie. How are you guys?
Fantastic. How are you,
Swell.
bud?
So,
Really swell, really psyched, really excited after returning from the movies.
And what movie was that?
Ooh, Batman versus Superman.
And you give it a thumbs up, huh?
And give it 4.5 red pills out of 5.
Wow. All right.
it's a
And
lot
Mike,
of red pills.
we haven't talked to you in a while.
Yeah, Matt, it's good to be back.
So is your new book done?
Oh, it's so close. It will be done this weekend.
Cool.
I've just got to tweak a couple of the revisions, so I'm very happy to say it will be off to my editor, who will be very, very happy to have it.
Nice.
And it's
All
good,
right.
man. It's all about magic and it's craziness and apocalypse and all that stuff we like.
Hey, congratulations, man.
Thank you.
You didn't intentionally write a bad book?
Well, I mean, according to me, it's not a bad book, but we'll see what everybody else thinks.
And this is the third of the trilogy, right?
Yeah, and the third book's always where you really have to nail it, or people get pissed
Stick
Fair
to
enough.
it.
because they
Isn't the
invested a lot of time.
Isn't the second book the most difficult to write?
Yeah. I mean, I think the second book in this trilogy, Witchlights, I think was actually better than the first book. So.
Mhm.
So we'll see what people say about the third, but I'm happy with it.
You don't have dancing Ewoks at the end.
No, I thought about throwing some little fuzzy dancing creatures in there, but then something told me I probably shouldn't.
All right, so tonight we're going to be dealing with the subject of night terror and sleep paralysis, and all the stuff that this connects to. And I started wanting to do a show on this, not only because we, amongst ourselves, have talked about some of this stuff before. Mike has talked about one of his experiences, but there's a movie called The Nightmare, and it's a documentary with some reenactments of these things. And it's the same guy that did Room
237.
which was about I have it and I've never watched it.
Yeah, it's about the people's kooky theories about The Shining, what The Shining means, and what Kubrick was, everything from the space, fake space missions to Native American something, and it's crazy.
Was it any
I
good?
thought it was going to be more fun than it turned out to be. In my opinion, it was a little tedious.
Huh. Okay.
I think I watched part of it, and it was good, but it was, showing people connecting the dots too hard, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Wait,
Over analyzing every single aspect of every single frame in that movie.
Yeah, when connecting the dots, you can connect the dots that are a mile apart. It just just doesn't make much sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's kind of a good study in conspiratorial psychopathology.
Huh.
Mhm.
All right.
But a bit tedious, I found.
Unlike The Nightmare, and I found this to be an excellent.
Yeah.
A friend of mine recommended it to me, and I watched it, and he told me what it was, and I guess it didn't really click that it was a documentary. And I'm watching it, I'm like, this is really well done, and it brings up some really interesting questions. And it is available on Netflix for anyone who hasn't seen it. I would definitely recommend watching it.
Absolutely, and
Preferably a day, preferably in the day, because if you watch it at night and you happen to leave alone, then you're probably not going to have any sleep.
yeah, the first time that I watched it, I was actually at home alone. My wife was out on a business trip, and I did not have a great night that night. That's for sure. But a couple things. I mean, the director, whose name is Rodney Asher. I would love to see him tackle a traditional horror film at some point, because his staging and his eye for visuals and his timing actually are absolutely fantastic, and I would love to see him really approach that. But even more than that, it was an incredibly refreshing take on it because you see something like The Nightmare, and you think it's going to go in there and it's going to provide a very materialistic explanation for these sort of experiences, and that's not at all what he does. It's almost like he sets up his camera and he says, "Hey, tell me about what you've experienced." And he builds recreations around that, and it's harrowing. It's absolutely engaging, and it's refreshing in the way that it doesn't make judgments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Agreed.
yeah.
I kept waiting for the the sleep research scientist to drop
Exactly,
in
yeah.
and kind of explain it all away, and it was refreshing that it didn't take that tack. It just let people tell their stories.
Right, right. And it definitely brings up some questions that I mean, the standard explanation for sleep paralysis goes something like you're starting to wake up or you're starting to fall asleep, but your conscious brain doesn't go to sleep, but the parts of your brain that control your movement and stuff shut off as if it's asleep. And then you
Mm-hmm.
start having dream imagery while you're still awake, and that's the explanation for these type of things. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of stuff that's been brought up here and experiences that I know Mike has had, one, particularly one that makes you think there's something more going on. The standard explanation may work 50%, 80% of the time, but there's definitely something else here, and there's a lot of connections to other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And particularly with UFOs, a lot of UFO debunkers will say people aren't getting abducted; they're just having night terrors. Except that, of course, it doesn't always happen when they're sleeping.
Right.
They tend to be,
And night terrors, or sleep paralysis doesn't, shouldn't, if it's just a physiological condition, shouldn't leave physical traces.
right.
Yeah.
Actually, Mike, why don't you tell people what happened with you,
Yes, please.
so that
Whew.
they have that?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
how long ago was
This was 1996. I know because there was a crazy blizzard that year. There were actually two snowstorms that rolled in, and one after the other. And I happened to be in West Virginia with a girlfriend of mine at a bed and breakfast. And we were one night. I have to preface this that at the time I was experimenting with melatonin, which is a neurohormone naturally occurring in the human body. A lot of people were taking it in the 90s for like life extension purposes, but mostly people took it for sleep. And I started taking it to help me fall asleep, and I found out that it really kicked up my dreams, like to an extraordinary degree, that I was having just these insanely complicated, intensely emotional dreams that were just, incredible plots that I would have a hard time coming up with, if I sat down and tried to do it. So while I'm with, my girlfriend, we got snowed in at this bed and breakfast in West Virginia near Berkeley Springs, and I was taking probably about 30 milligrams of melatonin, which is about 10 times the average dose that people were taking then.
Oh
Really,
boy.
really, it's fine. But the thing is, it's not psychoactive, though.
No.
It's not a psychoactive drug. I mean, if you ask any pharmacologist, what taking that much would do, they'd say, I don't have nothing really. It doesn't
makes you
act on.
sleep?
It doesn't act on any of the normal, systems that or the agonist or the receptors that cause psychoactive sort of symptoms like hallucinogenic or psychedelic or otherwise.
Right.
But I was just taking
and
this to see
when
if I could.
Sorry,
ahead.
when Strassman did his DMT work, that's one of the things they looked into, what an effect melatonin had, as far as like hallucinatory effects or anything like that. And he said he phoned up whatever research laboratory, and they'd given this guy this huge dose of melatonin. And they're like, "Is he hallucinating?" And they're like, "Nope, he just doesn't want to get back up."
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually it has kind of a paradoxical effect in a lot of ways. Like if you for some people, and including myself, sometimes it keeps me wide awake and I can't sleep. As a matter of fact, my wife was taking it recently for sleep, in a very small, normal dose, and it kept her awake all night. She was in like sort of a twilight sleep. But anyway, that's so, just to preface this with, I was taking a very, very large dose of melatonin, which is a tryptamine, Soraya. So, it is related, chemically related to DMT and psilocybin, things like that, but it's not it's not a psychoactive drug. Although there is speculation that's produced in the pineal gland, which is related to the mystical third eye and stuff like that. So there's all this kind of, mythological stuff around melatonin.
Yeah,
But
there's something attached to it in some way. I'm convinced.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I'm taking a large dose of melatonin, and I went to sleep, and I woke up having an absolutely, one of the maybe the most horrifying thing that ever happened to me. A full-blown sleep paralysis, couldn't move except for my eyes, and I'm looking around the room. The room's taken on this aura of malevolence, of evil, and I know something is in the room. And that's the common thread of a lot of sleep paralysis, is that you just sense, something terrible, something demonic is in the room. They call it the intruder, or a sensed presence, or whatever. And so I'm feeling this, man. I mean, I'm thinking I'm going to die, because this thing is going to rip my soul out. It's not like a burglar or a human intruder. I mean, this thing is a demon. It's the absolute most evil thing in existence, and it's there to get me. It's there to extinguish me as a person. And so it was terrifying, and I actually don't quite know how it resolved. I I I I woke up the next day, and so somehow I fell back asleep after this thing happened. So there was no real resolution to it. There was just this moment that felt like it was lasting forever. There was pure terror, like nothing I've ever felt before. And so what happened? I fell asleep, I guess, or again, I'm not quite sure what happened. But the next morning, my girlfriend looked over at me, and she said, "What's that on your chest?"
Oh.
And I said, "What?" And I looked down, and I could see like some kind of red thing on my chest. So I went in the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and there was a handprint on my chest, a red handprint. So I'm thinking, well, I must have slept on my hand. I mean, it was really bright red and vivid, almost like someone had painted it on. And then I looked at it a little closer, and I tried to fit my hand to it to see if I could twist either of my hands around, and neither of them really fit. And then I noticed the fingers were longer than my fingers on this handprint. And then I did sort of a double take, and this is when, the hackles were raised. It had 6 fingers, and not blurry fingers. I mean, this handprint was 6 distinct, vivid fingers, as if someone had dipped their hand in paint. Their 6-fingered, long-fingered, large hand in paint.
Hell no.
And slapped it on my chest. And I remember talking to my girlfriend. I'm like, do you see there's 6 fingers on this? And she's going, I could tell she was getting a little freaked out by it. I think she was more freaked out that I was getting so freaked out by it. She's like, oh, you must have just slept on your hand. I'm like, no, I tried to see if it would fit. And there's 6 fingers, and to this day, that is, aside from seeing some weird stuff in the sky, that is truly the freakiest thing that's ever happened to me. And I before I did my first podcast with Soraya, I called her up. She lives in Georgia now, and I'm like, hey, do you remember that? And she's like, oh my God, yeah. And it turns out, that I didn't know at the time, but when I called her up, she started telling me about the guy she started dating after me and actually married and had a child with, she started telling him about the six-fingered handprint incident that I had, and he started telling her about waking up with scratches on his body and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, it just the weirdness just multiplied. But so I basically called her to verify that I was remembering this all correctly, and
Right.
she winds up spinning the story in another direction. I'm like, so, you know, so I had sleep paralysis, yes, but there was a physical component of some sort.
You know, that's interesting in terms of that facet of her having experiences with both you and the gentleman that she ended up spending the rest of her life with. Because, you know, in the documentary, there are a couple of people who don't have sleep paralysis until they actually end up dating someone who has sleep paralysis, and then they get sleep
Yeah,
paralysis. It's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, in the film they call it sleep transmitted disease, STD, sleep transmitted disease,
Yeah,
or something like that. Yeah, and that was I had never heard that before until I saw the documentary. That was a kind of an eye opener.
And the question becomes, did something actually leave a handprint on you, or did your mind convince your body to create a handprint on your chest?
Or her mind.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah, or
maybe,
her mind.
yeah, maybe it was hers, somehow imprinting. Right.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, I've seen and I've read about, hypnotists can, tell someone they're going to touch them with a burning hot coal or something and touch them, with a
Yeah.
pencil eraser and a blister will raise.
Right.
And there's that scene in The Exorcist with Linda Blair, when the words, spell themselves out across her skin. Yeah, I mean, as you guys know, I try to remain, pretty agnostic about this stuff, but all I know is that there was, whatever this thing was, it wasn't from my hand. And,
Yeah.
I certainly don't have six fingers the last time I checked. So somehow it got there. And it got there in, proximity to having this horrifying experience of something demonic in my bedroom.
Right.
Well, and what interests me about the six fingers aspect is that I think some recent research has suggested that perhaps these figures that you see during sleep paralysis are projections of the self, that you're actually externalizing your body map. But
Mhm.
if it has six fingers, that's not your body map.
Right. It was in the documentary. It was the guy named Jeff who had actually took some notes here, so I'd remember this. He picked it up from his girlfriend. She was telling him about it, and then they were sleeping, and suddenly he started having these experiences, these sleep paralysis, and he had never had one prior to that.
Hmm.
And later on, it might have even been the same guy. I don't remember because I am horrible keeping track of names, and they only put their names at the beginning. But he said he had told someone about what was happening with him, and he just told her over the phone. He described it and stuff, and the next thing you know, she was having that experience.
Yeah, she texted him back. She's like, "You jerk," or whatever,
Yeah, exactly.
probably in less kind language. But yeah, that's and that was an interesting aspect of the film. Like some of these little nuances I had never heard of, and since I had that experience, and I had traditional sleep paralysis before, that thankfully didn't leave handprints or anything on my body. But so I've always been fascinated by it. And I've done a lot of research and read the academic research and books and papers and, pretty much everything I could get my hands on. But that, that folkloric aspect I had never come across before.
Hmm.
So that was really interesting. The idea that at least the people they interviewed, whether this is common or it's just, happens to happen to have happened to these people. It seems it's gotten like that, that folklorish aspect to it now, that it could be transmitted to other people.
It's also interesting that they talked to a very good variety of people who had different types of experiences and different thoughts about what was happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Yes.
remember this guy. I actually took notes about the movie when I watched it. This guy who reported these entities which had skin like TV static
Love that.
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
inky eyes. So the inky eyes, you'll say, well, the typical gray alien. But this idea of seeing this like static like surface on the skin of these entities, that was something that I had never heard of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he's the one that also wandered in to see his dad was watching Communion,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
the movie, and he saw the alien guys on there, and it shocked him because he was like, "Wait a minute, someone is, somebody else understands this experience."
Yeah,
And he is. Go on.
no, sorry. And he also made like a mask showing
Yeah.
what he
Mhm,
remembered.
mhm.
So I was, I actually made a sketch of this mask because it was so creepy because it was like showing a gray alien but with this really big gaping uh, toothless mouth, wide
Mhm.
Yeah.
open, right? So it was like a combination of the gray alien, but with what we will call the grinning man.
Mhm.
So it
Yeah.
was super creepy.
That's a
Yeah,
nice little
yeah,
correlation there. Yeah.
yeah.
Now this is also the same guy who was with a girl that he said was a little bit out there, and they had gone into the woods, and she had her eyes closed, and she was reaching out, and there was this. She's like, "Oh, there's this blue being here," and he could actually see the blue being.
Yeah.
And then she's relaying messages from this being, and one of them is she turns to him and says, "Just ignore the demons behind you." And he was like, "Wait, what?"
Hmm.
And he turned around, and there were the two things he had seen as a child standing right behind him. And this was in, for all intents and purposes, a normal state of consciousness. He wasn't asleep or anything when this happened.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was. I mean, it I have to step back a little bit and say, I I don't think any of these people seemed like they were confabulating, or
No.
there was one guy that seemed. I can't remember his name was Chris or something. He seemed a little too actorish,
Mm.
And for me, usually when you see documentaries with real people talking, it's clear that they're real people and they're not actors. But this one guy seemed very good at his style of communication.
Emotive. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I wouldn't say the film is like a pure, uh, documentary that I would, embrace. I can't really tell. I don't know enough about these people, to know their,
Sure.
what's really going on. So there was always a little my little skeptical, part of my brain was just kind of sitting there going a couple times, just felt a little, uh, uh, a little disconcerted maybe about these folks,
Well,
but
it's
for
not.
the most part, I think, for the most part, I thought the women seemed much more seemed the really credible ones to me, and maybe that's just some kind of j- you know prejudicial judgment in my case or something.
Well, it is not a raw, fly by night sort of enterprise. It is a very slick and well put together production. So kudos to them on that. So
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think it's out of the realm of possibility that maybe perhaps they took uh, some testimony from someone and had someone else read it in the sense of truthiness. Um,
Mm.
yeah, but the same, but yeah, I understand where you're coming from with that, Michael.
Hmm. Hmm.
And Chris was the one who was saying that when he was 5, the television started talking to him.
Yeah, right. That's the guy.
Which
And I, and
kind
I
of like reminds me of something that Whitley Strieber mentions in one of his books when he actually had a conversation with someone speaking to him from his stereo system at
Yep.
his New York cabin.
and I think Keel has written about similar things as well.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's not unheard of. And I guess if that happened to you when you were 5, that's probably going to stick in your mind for a while.
Oh, you think?
Well, and you know, another Keelian connection is the gentleman who picked up his phone and was having a strange phone call in the middle of the night,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't think I'm the only one to have experienced. Am I the only one of the four of us to have experienced that? Maybe I am.
Voices.
Yeah, the electronic voices. Yeah, and that was a really compelling little anecdote that he had. But the similarities are there again. The idea that even in this age of technology, whatever it is, prefers to use the telephone.
But that was inside of one of his sleep paralysis experiences, wasn't it?
Yeah, but there was something. Wasn't there something? Wasn't there something that made it suggestive to him that perhaps it was an actual phone call, or was it
Yeah,
entirely
I
within
think he had a phone call, and in the phone call, the last thing is, oh, "Can I ask you something?" Yeah, what?
Yeah, but that was
Let me in.
yeah, that was the sleep paralysis.
No.
Oh, I didn't realize it was entirely within the sleep paralysis. I thought that was an external component too.
Nope. So yeah, that was definitely within his sleep paralysis that he got the phone call. But Josh, tell us
Okay.
about the phone calls you've gotten.
Well, I was the shortened version of it was that I had spent a week with my family and my then fiance at Hilton Head, South Carolina, and my parents had gone back the night before we were supposed to leave. And they'd arrived at home safely. And that evening, my wife and I had spent all day on the beach, and we had retired to bed. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, which is not a time where anyone in my family would have gotten up, I got a phone call on my cell phone, and I answered it, and it was this robotic voice that wouldn't respond to anything that I was saying, and I couldn't make out what it was saying at all, but it sounded very much akin to a speak and spell, that sort of like electronic Stephen Hawking esque um, sound, but all of it was gibberish rather. And I closed up the phone and I immediately called back my family because the caller ID had originally said that it had come from my parents' phone, and
Hmm.
none of them had not made that call and they had no idea where it had come from. So I assume that there's probably some sort of very prosaic explanation for it being some sort of crossed wires or something along those lines. But it was really odd that the caller ID was from them, and they hadn't made that phone call at some time when anybody would have been doing anything in the house. And I had this weird, bizarre mechanical voice, which sounds very Keelian, to be honest.
Yeah.
Sort of where I've landed on it with myself is that perhaps it has something to do with the sort of mental state that I was in, because this was before A Trojan Feast was published, and I was sort of in this really focused, like, I've got to get this out there. How's this going to do? I'm not sure, what am I getting into, sort of
They're
mindset.
watching.
Yeah, and so I wonder if maybe in the middle of the night I had cyclically projected that onto the whole thing.
Yeah, the only thing ever weird like that with me is a few times when I had spent the night at a friend's house when I was a teenager, I would get calls here, and this is before this is like back in the late '80s, so we didn't have caller ID or anything. But I'd get calls with this girl asking for me that my mother had no idea who it was, couldn't identify it, said it was very hard to hear them, like they were on a really bad connection. This never happened when I was home. I have no idea who it would have been, but it only happened when I was spending the night down at a certain friend's house.
Was there anyone in your family who was a female who you were close to that
No.
had died at
Nope.
that point, or?
Nope.
Interesting.
Joshua,
Yeah.
there's do you know about the call that Jack Sarfati, the quantum physicist, do you know that story?
Off the top of my head, no, I do not.
Okay, he was like 12 or 13 years old, and he got a call, and it was this robotic voice that said it was calling from a spaceship.
Yes, I have heard the story.
Yeah, and
keep
it
keep
said
telling
it
it though. Keep telling it. Yeah.
Yeah, it wanted to teach him something if he was willing. So he said, yeah. And I think he sat around with his friends, and at some point when they told him to, I'm a little hazy on the story, but he kept getting phone calls. And his mother said he would get these phone calls, and he would just sit and listen on the line and would never comment. And she got kind of worried about him. But he never recalled the phone calls. But when you said the robotic voice, that was the first thing. And again, very Keelian too. Very much so.
Well, yeah, and not to really overemphasize this point, but I think that there's something about telephone communication that whatever this big THIS is tends to prefer that over more electronic mediums. I mean, you don't get the same sort of spooky phantom phone call type stories about email, and if you do, it's a lot easier to dismiss them. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's really interesting the way that whatever it is seems to prefer to interface with that type of technology.
There
Well,
seems to be electromagnetic component in all
yes.
of this, and that's something that was mentioned in this documentary. People seeing or perceiving some kind of static in the room, or some kind of like feeling this, like the atmosphere charging up. So maybe that's the reason why this phenomena has also been somehow linked or associated with telephone conversations, with analog equipment like old stereos, and maybe not so much with our current digital technology. Now I'm thinking of other things, thinking of how some scientists are saying that when now with our transition from analog into digital, there's going to be like this of signals sent by our civilization that is going to be picked up or could be picked up by a possible extraterrestrial civilization trying to listen to signals from other places. And well, I don't know where I'm getting with all of this, but there seems to be something with electronics, electromagnetism, and maybe people who are hypersensitive to electromagnetic fields, which I kind of think I am, and maybe that's something that triggers this kind of phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the other thing. A lot of those, especially some of the women who were describing how they felt before the situation happened. Anna and Corrine were two in particular. Sounded all the world like they were having active Kundalini, and that interfaces directly with electronics.
Yeah, I would love to see a survey of the people who have sleep paralysis and those who have active electronics in their bedroom at night. I mean, I sleep with an ionizer, and I haven't had that many. I'm no stranger to sleep paralysis. I've had it happen a couple of times. I've never had an entity associated with it, but I've always been in this sort of odd state where I see the room around me, and I'm usually able to pull myself out of it and keep a level enough head that I realize what's happening to me. But really, ever since I've had an ionizer running in my room, I don't think I've really noticed it as much. So I wonder if there might be something to do with that. Which, I mean, honestly, it's an idea that I've been kicking around a long time. Is that the reason that more quote unquote primitive cultures have more interactions with the supernatural is because they aren't encapsulated by this electromagnetic bubble that we are.
Well, not only that, but the one guy was saying that to fend it off, he would put TVs in his room.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And he had a whole pile of TVs, and then one day he said, "This is stupid. It's still happening to me." And he took them all away, and then he said it came back with a vengeance on him.
Yeah, which reminds me of, I know that Rosemary Ellen Guiley has suggested, I don't know exactly where she gets this information, but she has suggested that the jinn are actually deterred by electronics in the bedroom. So I don't know if that has any bearing on this at all.
Interesting.
Interesting.
One of the things I noticed is that all but a couple of these people in this documentary have had weird experiences since they were very young. Like Chris with the TV talking to him. The one guy saw the staticky things come into his room when he was a child. One person was describing stuff when they were in a crib. And so that, or maybe the staticky people were in the crib. The guy who there was one kid there who said his bed was on a slant because his mother had tons of stuffed animals under.
Beanie Babies.
Beanie Babies, thank you. And the frame was broken, and so the bed would rest on the Beanie Babies and be at kind of like a teetered angle, and he could see right out his door, and then things came in. But again, all these were happening when they were children. So aside from the guy who picked it up from somebody else, it seems like this is something that has gone back, just like UFO experiences and other paranormal stuff seems to have been running through their entire life.
Yeah.
And in some cases, they're like their parents also had it, because I remember the one woman
Yeah.
talking to her mother about it.
Yeah. I wonder if it's a familial thing, in the same way, because and unfortunately, my youngest daughter seems to be having really profound night terrors,
Oh.
and to the point where, I mean, I think she was 5 years old. Also, really crazy, really dense mythological dreams in which she'd tell me about them. I'd be a little shocked that, a 5-year-old would be talking about the god Mercury and stuff like this. And it was really, it was freaky. But at one point, she had come out of one of these, night terrors, and my wife was trying to calm her down. She's like, my wife's saying, what happened? What happened? And remember, this is a 5-year-old kid. She looked up at my wife and said, you wouldn't understand. She's like, basically like, I can't even explain to you. You wouldn't even understand. And that freaked me out, because, this stuff started happening to me when I was about her age, roundabout there, is when I started seeing lights in my room and having these paralysis events where I was awake and I would kind of fall down and go unconscious. Terrified that there was something in my bedroom. So, to see that happening now to her is heartbreaking to me. It may be completely unrelated, and it may have nothing to do, or if I've got my materialist hat on, then I'm thinking that, oh well, this is some kind of genetic thing that's being passed down. But I know the terror that I felt when I was her age, and to think that she might be experiencing similar things is really heartbreaking to me as a parent. What can you do? There's nothing. There's nothing I could do. As a kid, I had to learn how to deal with this stuff. So,
at least having been through it, though, you can try to talk to her about it. Whereas it doesn't sound like you had anyone to really talk to about it.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I try to. I try to just be the best supportive parent, and try to help her, not fear these experiences so much. But what can I really do, though? It does feel very, I feel just helpless. To really do much, if you're having experiences of like entities or whatever, or just plain night terrors, if there's nothing at all, paranormal involved in it, still, there's not much you could do as a parent.
Wait,
Yeah.
wait, but Mike, let me ask you this. So, what you're saying, so does that mean that when you were a kid, you were experiencing nightmares frequently?
Yeah. I had night terrors where my mother would come into my bedroom and I would just be screaming with no sound coming out of my mouth. That terror, that feeling when you're having a nightmare and you're trying to scream and nothing's coming out. It's just this. It was a regular thing, and yeah.
Okay, so but at one point, those nightmares became less and less frequent. Can
Yes.
pinpoint what age you
Yeah,
were?
probably 9 or 10 or something like that.
Okay. So from
but they were pretty regular through my early childhood, and along with the seeing lights in my room and stuff that was, if the single and again, I have to preface this with, this is early childhood. I mean, how much do we really recall clearly from that period? But
Yeah.
with that in mind, the several of these experiences feel extremely real to me, and there were numerous occasions where it happened to me as I was walking to my bedroom, and I would see something in my room that was light, and I would fall down on the floor in the hallway and just go out of my go unconscious
Well,
until I'd get back up again. And so,
So uh,
for whatever that's worth.
we started this conference by you telling how um, you started to experiment with melatonin
Hmm.
because you wanted to you find something that will help you to sleep.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, am I correct in saying that after you overcame these night terrors, you then went through a period in which it was difficult for you to fall asleep?
No, this was more, starting to use melatonin was more, I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I was just, having like occasional bouts of insomnia. So I
Mm-hmm.
started taking it, and why I started experimenting with melatonin is because the dreams I was having were so incredible. And I have to say, at one point when I was experimenting with melatonin, I had the first night terror that I'd had since I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Which I kind of forget about that, but melatonin in general just gave me really vivid, realistic, but also fantastical sort of dreams.
yeah,
Um,
and in my experience, my melatonin dreams are a little bit more insightful than my non-melatonin
huh.
dreams.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
as someone who still sort of dips into that pool every now and then whenever I'm feeling
Hmm.
like I need a good night's
Yeah.
sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So almost as if you reopened a channel in your mind.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good way of looking at it, and that's what, of course, the way my mind thinks, which has been fueled by fantasy books, and
Yeah.
and the super, studying the supernatural and the paranormal and all that. My first sort of hypothesis was that melatonin opens some sort of psychic doorway,
Mm.
to that allowed whatever something to come through. And of course, that's obviously one hypothesis for sleep paralysis, is that something may be happening in your brain, but whatever that's happening is also associated with some sort of entity also coming into your environment as well.
Yeah.
And before we go any further, I want to say, if anyone listening to this has had experiences like this and want to talk about them, contact me. Go to the website under contact. I think it's stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com. If I get enough, maybe I'll do a whole show on listeners' experiences with night terrors and sleep paralysis. You can also talk about this on the new forum I put up on the wheredidtheroadgo.com. I'll put up a subject for it, and if anyone wants to chime in there, they're welcome to as well. Um, but let's talk about the connections here with the UFO phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as we said at the top, a lot of debunkers will say, "Well, that's all contact experiences are. They're just sleep paralysis," and we know that's not the case. But there are some very striking similarities in these sleep paralysis episodes and abduction experiences. Although the sleep paralysis, you don't usually get them taking people away. They're just coming into the bedroom, but the entity seems similar to some degree. You
Hmm.
often get the big eyes. And like UFO experiences, they often run in families. What do we make of that?
Well, there's one other thing, that's a commonality of sleep paralysis, and that is people have out of body experiences associated
Yes.
with
True.
them. Which
Yep.
for a long time I was not aware of. I was aware of the intruder stuff, and all the other associated symptoms of sleep paralysis, but I was not aware that it was associated with so many people with out of body experiences. And that's, I mean, there you're definitely that adds another layer of similarity to the abduction phenomenon.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is that a lot of people want to say, well, all abductions must be a function of sleep paralysis, without saying, well, maybe sleep paralysis opens us up to something that the abduction experience is a greater part of.
There you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is where I personally have sort of landed on the whole thing. And I think that what we're dealing with, honestly, is something akin to something that Soraya and I've talked about a lot: big dreams and small dreams. There are big dreams, which are dreams that are profound and that actually mean something, that are actually tapping into something more significant. And then there are small dreams, which are like, I went down the street and my head was made of jam and I ended up seeing a dog that said hello with the top hat, And I think that sleep paralysis kind of falls into that sort of category as well. It's some of them are meaningful and some of them are just like, literally just bodily hallucinations. But I can't help but see another through line that happens with a lot of tricksterish supernatural phenomena, is that this is a liminal state. It's a state between wakefulness and sleepfulness. It is the in-between twilight zone that these things like to inhabit.
I think what this, when we try to make these connections, is that, like Joshua proposed, when humans go to sleep, we go and our minds cross this threshold between this reality and other realities that seem to be on those states as valid as our waking reality. So if we entertain this alternative further along, we might go and acknowledge the idea that this reality is also a dream. It's just a much more convincing dream, a much more resilient dream, but it's also a dream. It's also a dream that we may end up waking up. On some occasions, maybe when we die, or maybe when we go and change our perceptions through the use of psychedelics or other types of meditation or something like that. But yeah, maybe that's the connecting points of all of this.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then, of course, the other factor we get is shadow people. And I myself have seen plenty of shadow people in full waking consciousness without, any kind of liminal state whatsoever.
Yeah.
But that is a very common thing that people see in this paralysis state, is something that, you got the hat man, you got the typical shadow people and things like that. But again, who's to say this is not tapping into something or drawing the attention of something when you're in that state?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I hadn't personally seen them for myself outside of any kind of liminal state, I'd say, well, okay, it's just a liminal thing that our brain drags up. But that's not the explanation for what I've seen, and it's the same type of thing.
Can you describe what you saw?
There's been so many of them.
Well,
I think one of the more striking ones, we were in this graveyard that a lot of weird stuff happened in, and we were playing hide and seek, and I thought it was like two of us looking for two other people. It was the middle of the night, and I thought I saw my friend creeping along the edge of where they have this Civil War memorial, and I'm kind of going to him, psst, hey, and he's not responding, and he's moving real stealthily and real cat-like, and I could see him crystal clear, but it was just a shadow because it was so dark out. And all of a sudden I hear him yell from the other side of the graveyard because he grabbed a hold of one of the other people. And I went, wait a minute, who's that? And as I got closer, it literally just disintegrated. When I went back the next day, when it was daylight out, where this shadow was walking through, you couldn't have walked through. It was all thick bush.
Interesting. Was there a demon monkey there?
No, that was my
Let's give you a hard time.
What's a pet cemetery?
Sometimes I wonder.
Now we know that Sarai is the type of guy who plays hide and seek at night in cemeteries.
You wouldn't have thought that, would you?
I like the idea that sleep paralysis is the consciousness equivalent of getting stalled in a bad neighborhood. It's like if you just keep moving, you're going to be fine. But if your car engine kicks out at this one point, you're gonna be stuck amongst some people who are less than savory. Um, but things like that, where you're completely conscious, it implies that there is something else going on in terms of the shadow person phenomena.
And the interesting thing about that spot, I mean, like I said, a lot of weird stuff happens in that graveyard. I was walking through with a girl a couple of years ago who was just starting to be able to pick things up here and there. And I never told her that story. And as we walked through that area, there's like the memorial's on like the right. From the left-hand side, she literally watched a shadow person walk out of the graves, get to the middle of the not walkway, it's like bad driveway, I guess you could say, partially paved, and then just disappear. And I had never seen this girl afraid of anything, and she just stopped and turned white, and I stopped, and she was about to bolt, and I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Okay, just saw a shadow person disappear in front of me."
Jesus.
Well, it's funny. You go on like haunted house. You go on ghost hunting expeditions, and a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, I saw a shadow person poking his head out the door," and I've been on one of these and I didn't see jack. But I think that's a very different. I think something about that is very different than what you see in the hypnagogic sleep state. I think what you see in the sleep paralysis state is a lot more tangible than what like, because whenever you're in that sort of, I mean, obviously, if you're going out ghost hunting in a creepy old abandoned sanatorium or something, you're primed to see something.
True.
But if you're wanting to sleep, you might not necessarily be, open to that happening.
Well,
You know-
when we were playing hide and seek, I was not primed to see anything.
Exactly,
Then I didn't
exactly.
think I was seeing anything.
Sure.
And here's the other thing: they've always appeared like, I always describe them as liquid darkness
Oh, yeah.
because they don't look like a shadow necessarily. It's just that they're blacker than black, like they're sucking in the light.
Mm.
But it's not like, if you look at a shadow, it doesn't have really defined edges.
Right.
Mhm.
But these things always seem to have very defined edges, like it's a ball of black.
Mm.
Which is wild.
I think the most disturbing thing that this documentary and the idea of shadow people and the sleep paralysis seems to propose is something that I encountered first while reading the work of Carlos Castañeda. The idea that we inhabit a predatory universe, and there are things out there that see us the same way that we might see a chicken, or a rabbit or something. That we, when we are asleep or something, we become vulnerable, and we are easy prey for entities that may be lurking out there, in these twilight stages. And the thing that is disturbing is, okay, so what happened? Obviously, these people in this documentary, they're able to tell their stories because eventually they woke up, so they weren't vulnerable anymore. But what happened when you die? What happened? Does that make you more vulnerable? Do you become then? Do you fall into some entity's nest, and you're ready then for the
Oh,
picking?
that's a creepy thought, man.
I know that's.
Well, it from a magician's perspective, at least the Western magical traditions, but also shamanic traditions and Eastern magical traditions too. I mean, when you're in an altered state, you are vulnerable. That's why in the Western magical traditions, you do banishings. You cleanse the environment because there are all these things out there. Whether they call them parasites or just beasties. I think in any magician's training, you learn that when you start practicing magic, you know, they in some tradition, I think the Golden Dawn tradition, you know, it's you're lighting up the astral, you know, when you're doing these rituals and things, suddenly on other levels of reality, things are starting to pay attention to you. You know,
Yeah.
and it's a great analogy, Josh, about, you know, being caught in a you know, in a bad neighborhood, you know. And I think of it that way, as, you know, is you're caught, you know, if you're psychically, you know, attuned or in some sort of altered state, or whatever occurs during sleep paralysis, it's like you're in the bad neighborhood, but you're, you know, you're wearing a flashy suit, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and walking around looking at your iPhone glowing in your face, you know. And you know, so maybe the, you know, maybe, and this is making kind of a broader sort of analysis of, I guess, what I would call like a paranormal prone personality. And that's, you know, if you're the type of person who's likely to have sleep paralysis, you know, maybe you're also a person who's likely to see, you know, these dark entities or shadow people or whatever you want to call them. And, you know, so maybe you're just kind of walking around a little more lit up
Mm.
than other people are, and because of that you draw the attention of, you know, the low lifes in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
in which case, you know, I mean, imagine, you know, put yourself in the low life's shoes, you know, if they wear shoes. You know, yeah, here's suddenly, you know, you're just doing your thing in your dark domain, and here somebody lights up because they're having this physiological experience that also happens to have a psychic component. And what are you going to do? You know, you're going to go where that light is, you're going to check that out. You know, here's a juicy morsel to feast on.
Well,
And
I
if you feed on fear, you know, if you
Yeah.
feed on negativity, man, you know, that, hey, there's some guy having sleep paralysis, you know, I know exactly where I'm going.
well, and I would brazenly speculate that perhaps this happens more often than we realize. If you've got a monkey on your back, maybe you got that monkey in some sort of transitory state. You know, maybe you've got maybe that,
Yeah.
you know, that small addiction or that temptation that you're feeding is something that sort of latched onto you at some point.
Yeah, I
Could
mean,
be.
the idea of like sort of, you know, psychic parasites
Yeah.
has always seemed, you know, really logical to me. You know, if we are to you know, if we consider the possibility that there are non-corporeal entities out there, you know, I mean, you know, there are parasitical, you know, bacteria everywhere. There's viruses, there's bugs, there's mosquitoes, you know,
Hmm.
ticks. You know, why wouldn't the you know, the astral or etheric realm be full of these things too?
And I got the impression when I was watching it that some of these people felt like this stuff was just hunting them after a while as well, which fits that sort of
Mm-hmm.
archetype.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Something that really interested me, actually, something that interests me in general is just the idea of how other senses play into the sleep paralysis narrative. I talked on here before about how people who experience sleep paralysis, if they are nearsighted, will sometimes report that the entities are blurrier the farther away they are, which to me
Mm.
suggests some sort of objective component. But I also found it really interesting some of the aural aspects that some people reported in this particular
Mm-hmm.
documentary.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was the banging sound. Has anybody here ever experienced that? Banging or buzzing?
Oh yeah,
Really?
but that's also a very common symptom of Kundalini.
And abductions.
Yeah,
And I
Yeah.
would throw in there, like the one lady was
So
talking about the
squish.
tapping at her window is evocative of Sasquatch encounters and poltergeist encounters
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yep. And Whitley Strieber, you know, he talks about
Yeah,
not
yeah.
just the three knocks
The
or the
three
three
knocks.
series of three knocks, but the when he would meditate, and this little being came in, the one that he smelled, you know, he held this thing's hand and smelled it. It would always start with bumps on his on the roof.
right.
He'd hear a little like pounding on the roof as if things were dropping onto the roof. So yeah, I mean, yeah, and Joshua, a while back when we were talking about doing this particular podcast, I started looking at studies of sleep paralysis, and as far as the auditory element of it, what I found fascinating, and it was in the documentary that I just watched tonight, is that the fact that sometimes a lot of the time, I think it's the majority of the time, when people describe hearing these things talk to them, it's in gibberish or some strange, weird language. It's not often, and one of the guys said that in this film, but often when these entities talk, it's just kind of nonsensical, gibberish kind of language, which I found that really fascinating. And that's when you look at studies, that's what most people report when they hear something talking to them. It's often not just a straightforward message. It's just kind of like bizarre language that they're talking.
And I hate to keep on banging this drum, but two thoughts really sort of come to me. Number one is the idea that some people report to have heard Sasquatch speaking gibberish in the woods. The Sierra Sounds is actually a great example of someone who claims to have caught what they call "quote unquote" samurai chatter, because it sounds like bad Kurosawa translation. But it's always this unintelligible sort of noises of seeming like speech in the woods. But I also think about McKenna's ideas on the importance of glossolalia, the importance of the idea that meaning can be conveyed without actual enunciation of specific words. And I wonder if that might have some sort of meaning to this whole phenomena as well. The idea that, like speaking in tongues, in a lot of the ecstatic traditions, the idea that the meaning is what's more important than the actual medium in which it's presented.
Or in Western magical traditions, it's the barbarous languages.
Yes.
That's the same sort of thing, that you're conveying meaning in what sounds like nonsensical language.
Yeah, in Grant Morrison's comic series, The Invisibles, they talk about glossolalia as the primordial language. It's a language that is it acquires whatever meaning you need, from your own particular subconscious. Kind of like the UFO phenomenon. If you go along with Greg Bishop's idea that the UFO phenomenon is akin to an art project, you look at a piece of art and you see the art conveys a different meaning to you from the meaning that I may receive from it, because of my particular background, So maybe that's the same way that in which we interpret these entities. We talk about seeing shadow people with hats, kind of like 1940s kind of hats. Does that mean that people in, I don't know, Africa or in Japan or in China, do they see different hats, worn by these shadow entities? Or, are there different cultural perceptions in all of this?
Or as America's colonialism fades, does the fedora go away and get replaced by something different?
But as hipsters begin wearing them, see, it's back.
One of the more interesting cases, I think, on that documentary was the guy who was sleeping with two girls there, and it's in a small apartment, but anyway, he starts having this thing that he said looked like the Mothman. He said it was so tall it had a duck down in his building. It had glowing red eyes.
Yeah.
And he doesn't, and it's telling him it's going to kill him. It's going to do this, and it's just threatening him. And the girl next to him wakes up, which I think was his girlfriend, wakes up, and she sees this black cat on her chest with red eyes, staring at him, but she's not understanding what it's saying, but it sounds threatening to her. So the question there becomes, was there something there that was outside of them that both of them saw in different ways but conveyed a similar sort of feeling, or was he projecting something outwardly that was so strong that she was picking it up?
Before we go there, I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that he had enough of a cultural context to say, kind of like Mothman.
Right.
I think
Right.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that
yeah,
that's
Yeah.
significant. And I'm not
yeah,
casting
yeah.
necessarily casting
Sure.
aspersions upon what he was saying, but I think that that is a really interesting little nugget. Now, discuss.
Yeah, I immediately thought the same thing. Like, wow, this guy's done quite a bit of reading,
Well, I
which is
guess.
great. I mean, of course, I would hope that you would, if
Yeah.
if you have half a brain. I mean, if these
Mhm.
things are happening to you. Wouldn't you try to explore? That's also what fascinates me is when people say they've had sleep paralysis all their lives, but yet they never knew what it was.
Mm.
Yeah.
That strikes me as like, don't you think about this? Don't you think to pick up a book or something or look this up? It's that's always odd, but maybe there are people who just kind of cruise through life without really trying to figure out what's going on inside their heads. I don't know.
Well, I think it's a cultural thing. It's the kind of, I mean, when you go in the morning, to your work in the office, and what is the kind of conversations you have with your coworkers? You talk about maybe the movie that you saw last night on Netflix, or the game that was transmitted that week. Do you discuss your dreams with your coworkers, with your friends, with your family members? No, it's something that we keep to ourselves. It's private. It's almost shameful to discuss, particularly if it's something disturbing. So I
That's a
think
good
that
point. Yeah.
most people try to, keep that aspect of their life up to themselves. You know.
But
Mhm.
now you have that semi anonymity of the internet, though.
That's
Sure,
true.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, one of the things I also found interesting with that is it yeah, I don't know how to exactly explain it, but I'm wondering if it was something that was spreading to this girl because it seemed like she was having the same type of experience. But it also, in that case, was sort of the nightmare hag because it was sitting on her chest.
Hmm.
Mm.
But a cat too, and that's another odd aspect is some of these surveys that they've done of sleep paralysis. Sometimes people think that it's someone like that they know or a pet that they have or something like that, so you might think it's your cat coming up and sitting on you. That's what I flashed to when I saw that. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, but it's really fascinating that yeah, that here she's seeing a cat, he's seeing this giant 8 foot tall
Yeah,
humanoid with Mothman like laser red eyes uh, at the same time. Like was she? What made her see the cat? What made him see this giant humanoid? That's the
and
$64,000 question, I guess.
and then you have the fact that you have so many people who have seen red-eyed monsters in perfectly normal states of consciousness all over the world.
Hmm.
So again, you have that crossover of okay, these things don't just appear in sleep paralysis; they appear in normal what we could call normal reality as well.
Hmm. And what about like why aren't they ever like green eyes? Or
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
what is
I,
red?
I wonder how much of that is because if you ask someone to make up a monster, they're going to give it red eyes.
Well, to be
Like
fair,
whether or
you
not
run
that's
into
that's folklorical or whether that's how these things manifest.
to be
I
fair,
don't.
you do run into green-eyed Sasquatch and Dogman reports every now and then, but for the most part, it's
Yeah.
red-eyed. And
I
Hmm.
have
you know,
a person close to me who had a shadow person experience, and he reported it to have. He told me that, well, and obviously this is something cultural, that he kind of resembled like the Marvel character Venom, right? So it's a
okay.
Hmm.
shadowy person, almost like the person in this documentary with this really big mouth, this really grinning, grotesque mouth, and he reported it having yellow eyes.
Well, and Venom isn't too far removed from the gray alien image either,
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is something that was also portrayed in the documentary, which I think was really interesting. All these people seeing parallels or hints about this experience in popular culture.
Yes.
I think one of these people interviewed in the documentary saw this intro, this very surrealistic intro in the movie Natural Born Killers, and that the end of that intro shows like this shadowy figure, right? And so to the point that he wondered if the person who produced this sequence for the film experienced that. And there's also obviously Wes Craven, famous Nightmare on Elm Street, and you have this terrific entity, Freddy Krueger, who enters into his victim's dreams, and he's wearing a fedora, of course. So the problem with that is that skeptics are so fond of telling, oh well, obviously this is the result of people being influenced by all these pop culture elements. But someone like Jeffrey Kripal will be quick to point out that there is this chicken and the egg conundrum of these artistic entities being these artistic persons, writers and artists and painters being inspired by their own personal experiences, so they use that for their work, which is further injected into the popular culture. So this is all this cross-pollination going back and forth,
co-creation, really.
Exactly.
And since you touched on Wes Craven, I mean, he allegedly, thought up the idea of a Nightmare on Elm Street after he read what was happening to the Hmong population in the U.S. who were having an extraordinary rash of people dying in their sleep.
Yeah.
And blaming it on, I forget the name of their particular name for the sleep paralysis entity, but I mean, talk about art imitating life and then life imitating art until you get into this big, just like you said, Red Pill. I mean, how much are we how much are we, building this thing, as it's working off of us.
I totally lost what I was just going to say. You were talking earlier, Josh, about these people. I think it was you, Josh, who was saying these people have all told us stories because they haven't died.
No, I think it was Miguel.
Yeah, was it Miguel? Okay, but the one guy did die. He got shot in one of the experiences, one of the really weird experiences, and found himself just kind of like stuck there for a very long period of time, where he eventually was able to shake back out of it, but as far as he knew, he thought he was dead.
Well, and that prolapsed time period brings to mind... I'm sorry, I feel like I say the same things over and over again. It brings to mind missing time. It brings to mind being trapped in fairyland. It brings to mind the time prolation that people experience during the effects of DMT.
Yeah.
Sorry if I keep on banging that drum again, but it's I feel like it rears its head often.
And some of the notes you made on it, Red Pill, like the laser show could be similar to an entopic phenomenon,
which I have had experienced many times.
There was something else in here you attributed to that too, but there definitely seems to be some connections to that type of thing as well. Wish I could find the other note I just found of yours.
Can I throw something in, Soraya? Because I'm going to forget it if I don't get it out right now. But I mean, we think we think of sleep paralysis as just kind of this aberration, in the modern world, but couldn't this really be where religion came from? Couldn't this be where our whole conception of the paranormal, of supernatural entities?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, because this is deep stuff. I mean, these are experiences that scare the living crap out of modern, 21st century people who know better than to believe in spooky things, coming into their bedrooms. Imagine what this must have been like, a long, long, long time ago, when human beings are having these experiences.
Yeah.
I think
mean,
it's certainly.
does that make sense?
No,
Yeah,
that
no,
totally makes sense.
I think it certainly probably reinforced beliefs that were already established from interacting with the world around them. Animism plus sleep paralysis probably gives you something like druidic thought, I would think.
Yeah, yeah.
Not only that, but there were two cases here. One where the woman like prayed to Jesus or whatever, and it didn't change anything.
Uh-huh.
The other did the same thing, and it went away completely.
And she became a Christian.
Yeah, and she
I
was
love that. Yeah.
essentially an atheist because she said that a medium or a psychic had told her she would marry a Christian man, and she scoffed at it. And she's like, "Yeah, I don't see that ever happening." And then after this experience, she became Christian and ended up marrying a Christian man. But what this makes me think, I mean, if it was simply or if it was as simple as that, just praying to Jesus and these things would go away, hence they're demons, it would work for everybody.
Right.
But it doesn't. So is this a control factor? Were they trying to push her that way for some reason?
Yeah, and of course there are people in the alien abduction
Yes.
field
Yes.
who say, that saying the name of Jesus when these entities are coming to get you, it scares them away.
Yeah. I have a friend who has had these type of experiences, and what he would see would be grays coming in and getting ready to take him away. And he started doing the very same thing. He would pray to Jesus, and they would go away, and they've stopped since then. And he's become very religious because of this, which is fully understandable. But like I said, is it a control factor?
Being my typical iconoclastic Christian self, I would love to think that if an atheist says, Jesus, help me, it will absolutely help them. And if a fundamentalist says, Jesus help me, it won't do a damn thing.
It's funny. I think I talked about on a show a while back that I had this really terrifying sort of lucid. It felt like an entity attack after I'd been reading a bunch of Enochian magic books before I went to bed, and reading them out loud in my head. And I just read Lon Milo Duquette's autobiographical book. It's like My Life Among Spirits, I think it's called. So my brain was really kind of cooking on this stuff, and I was reading the Enochian names aloud in my head. I wasn't sitting there in bed, my wife next to me reading, "Ooh, my God," that sort of thing. But I was reading them aloud in my head, and then I had a really terrifying lucid dream. It was a dream at first that I was in a house, and something was knocking on the door. It was like an old farmhouse sort of house, like one shown in the film tonight. And as I opened the door, something growled.
Whoa.
And tried to push the door in. And when that happened, I became lucid in the dream, and I'm like, oh my God, I've got to, and I'm trying to shut the door, and this thing is trying to push its way in. And this is not the first time it's happened. I mean, lapsed Catholic boy that I am, and I don't really consider myself a Christian, but I love the Christian spiritual tradition.
Yeah.
I love the Christian stories and all that. But man, whenever something like that happens to me, when that happened that night, I went back to Jesus, man. I mean, I found the Lord.
Came back
I
to the
was,
flock
yes, I was. I mean, I was
in a
praying,
rush.
and because I was absolutely terrified. I mean, that moment was as terrifying as the sleep paralysis moment I've had, but this was like a lucid dream where I really felt like I was battling something that was really, really bad. And
What?
man, so I was saying like the Our Father, and I was pulling out everything. I was mentally doing like banishing pentagrams and all this. I was throwing the kitchen sink at this thing. um, so and it felt as real as if someone was pounding on my door right now trying to get in the house. So I don't know it whatever it was, I got it. I got out of that state. Whether it was calling on Jesus or what, I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
Well,
I mean, there might be names of power. There might be words that work or something. Who's it? I would not discount being able to do something like that.
I would tend to
Save
think.
me,
and
Hulk.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was saying that instead of speaking the name of Jesus, I will speak the name of Hulk. You know that he can beat the crap out of any
Yes.
puny.
And,
Captain
Yeah.
America,
Yeah,
please
okay.
help me. No, I would like to think, and this is not towing the Christian line as most popular culture has it, but I would like to think that any positive spiritual tradition would have a sort of power in that sort of situation. And the invocation of the names of positive spiritual leaders would produce a similar effect. Because I think that's really what it is. It's about the effect and the faith that is generated in the speaker or believer. I'll let it go at that because I don't want to turn it into the touchy feely demonic
Josh
expulsion
Cutchin
podcast.
Power Hour.
Yeah, exactly. Bedtime Bible chat.
Yeah,
Um,
the strength of the archetype.
Yeah.
Maybe
yeah,
this.
Yeah.
Well, consider this. Maybe this woman. Let's play with the idea that these things come from within us. Maybe when this psychic told her she'd, marry a Christian, eventually she believed it, and this experience happened that she generated internally to push her in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
But
certainly possible too. I mean, but then we're back at that, that critical point. Are these things of us and generated by us, or do they have a separate existence?
well, here's the other thing. So when David Weatherly wrote his book on black-eyed children,
Yeah.
the one thing he noticed is that the only similarity he found in people who had these experiences is that 99% of them were not religious at all. They were not spiritual people. They were not religious people. They weren't necessarily atheists. They just didn't have any religious. And after these encounters happened, a lot of them moved a little more toward religion and spirituality than they were before because it scared the crap out of them.
Mm-hmm.
Then you look at things like Fatima and Virgin Mary appearances, all which have the telltale marks of UFO encounters.
Right.
And then you really got to start thinking control system at this point. What are they trying to push us to? What are they trying to, orient us towards?
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the question of whether these are internally generated or externally generated, the mystic in me will answer that. There's no difference.
Yes. Well, that's very true. Very true.
Uh-huh.
So there was one thing on the nightmare where the woman was talking about having an experience after her mother died, and it was a positive experience for her, unlike all these other ones. And that to me suggests some, that suggests a little bit that it's coming from her, but maybe not. I mean, maybe the dead can access this realm the same way these other spirits can if they're external as rather than internal.
Well, then we get back into the UFO. We get back into Strieber, and when apparently when Anne Strieber was reading through all these, all the letters that were coming into them, she was like, "Hey, the dead have something to do with this."
Yes. Well, I mean, what I'm seeing from all this phenomena, from these night terrors, from this sleep paralysis, is that it somehow connects in with all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, it's not as simple as the body just shuts down while the mind stays awake.
Hmm.
Or the body goes, or part of your brain goes into a sleep state while the rest of it stays awake. Um, I mean, it makes sense on the surface, but the more of these stories I hear, the less, sense that it makes that it's just a brain thing.
Well, I would, I think uh, you know, we draw a line there where there doesn't have to be a line drawn.
Hmm.
And that just because there is a physical correlate in the brain does not mean that there's not something else happening at the same time.
Very true.
Right.
Like if you put me in a, it's like if you put me in a functional MRI scanner and show me a cupcake, or a picture of a beautiful woman or something, or a picture of a beautiful woman holding a cupcake, even better. There are going to be changes in my brain, and you can't say that those changes in my brain caused the woman, the beautiful picture of the beautiful woman with a cupcake. So just because there's something happening in our minds that is chemical, electrochemical, does not mean that there's not also something objectively happening that's related to those physiological changes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, uh, I think I was trying to say that, yeah, the same, like if you go with psychedelic experiences,
Hmm.
and if you, obviously there's a physical component with psychedelic experiences, there's the ingestion of
Hmm.
psychedelics,
Hmm.
but think that if science were trying to explain psychedelic experiences by only what happens with your stomach, how you break down all the chemicals and how it then goes and are passed on in your veins, goes and goes through the brain barrier and all of that.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's only part of it. You have to go beyond of that, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a great analogy. Sasha Shulgin, I think it's in Pikal, the book he
hmm
wrote about psychedelic phenethylamines.
hmm
He says, he talks about the first time he tried ecstasy or MDMA that he basically made in his lab, and he had this profound experience that cleansed his soul and made him have a fresh look on life, and made him think about the people he knew and loved and all this. And he's like, that wasn't in that 150 milligrams of powder. Those experiences are not in that powder.
yeah.
That 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 drug I took is just a catalyst for something in my consciousness. Like, my consciousness did eh, all the other stuff. The
Yeah. Yeah.
powder didn't do that. The powder doesn't contain my soul, my ability to think about all the people I know and my life, and all that
hmm
sort of stuff. It's not in that little capsule. that's
Yeah.
that's in me.
Yeah. The powder was only a catalyst.
Exactly.
And this reminds me of something. The research of Carla Turner. Dr. Carla
Oh
Turner,
yeah,
who
yeah.
was into investigating abduction experiences, and she ended up with a very negative view on the whole phenomenon. And one of the things that I found curious in her research was how she was always very hesitant or very dismissive of the claims of these entities, that they were trying to, do something spiritual, elevating the spirituality of the people who were experiencing these visitations. And the way she explained it away or dismissed it away is, oh, you cannot go and have an spiritual experience, with a physical, sexual or physical encounter. And my answer to that is sure you can. I mean, we are just talking about how you can have a physical experience like, I don't know, ingesting a mushroom, you know, taking a tab of acid, or maybe even have making love to your spouse or your lover. And obviously that is a physical component, but that leads away to a very could lead that way to a very meaningful, very profound spiritual experience. And I think it's the problem with our current Western society that tries to separate the spiritual world from the physical world, and there are many cultures, like, I don't know, shamanic cultures, in which they don't make those distinctions. They take the whole enchilada, as it were. You have spiritual experiences through physical interactions and the other way around.
No, absolutely. There was an interesting story in Jim Harold's latest book, and I had him talk about it. I don't remember if I had him talking about it on the main show or in the Patreon only section. I think it was on the main show, where this woman had dreamed. She was at her boyfriend's or whatever in college, and she fell asleep, and she had this dream of a black shadow moving across the ceiling, going toward the light switch, and she dreamed her boyfriend woke up and said, turn off the light or turn on the light or whatever. And then, she woke up all scared and freaked out. And when she fell back asleep, she had another dream about this dark shadow. And I think she grabbed the light switch at the same time the shadow got to the light switch or something, and she got an electrical shock go through her.
Oh.
And at the same time, her boyfriend was having almost the same dream.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the shared dream thing is not something that is all that uncommon. I mean, I know a very Christian couple who, she had a dream that he was running the Alaskan Mafia and was running up the stairs to choke her, and she had the dream that she had the dream that he was running the Alaskan Mafia, and he had the dream that he was running the Alaskan Mafia, whatever the Alaskan Mafia is, and he was running up the stairs to choke her, and he actually woke up choking her, and they both said that their dreams correlated in that way. Very, very close friends of mine and my wife.
Oh,
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think Sarah Palin is involved in the Alaskan.
Oh, you betcha.
And Iditarod racing.
Because they can see Russia from there.
You betcha.
Which, and if you can share a dream, and I've had that experience numerous times, what does that say about it? I mean,
Yeah.
It's not obviously an internal component if you're sharing a dream with someone, if you're having two pieces of the same dream.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what else can we say about this? Any other thoughts, guys?
I don't know, but
We've exhausted quite a bit of this topic, but
we've already established that night terrors are a very, very common thing. Whether people openly express it or openly acknowledge that they have them is another matter entirely. And it's kind of ironic, we're trying to find alien beings by using telescopes, and trying to use radio telescopes and all of that. And we may be having visitations from entities from another realms just by going to sleep, and putting our heads on a pillow. And I don't know, the thing is that we haven't established a way to try to, I don't know, protect yourself from these visitations, which seem to be really, for the most part, malintentioned in nature.
Right.
mm-hmm.
And whether they're actually malintentioned or if that's just the way we're reacting to them.
Okay, good point.
If we're co-creating them, I mean, it could be either one.
Yeah.
But what I think is interesting, if you look at if you tell a nut and bolt UFO guy, hey, look at sleep paralysis, they'll say that has nothing to do with UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
But as we've been going through here and showing, there are so many similarities, which of course is one of the reasons the debunkers will use it
Yes.
as the explanation, but maybe they're not realizing that there may be more to the sleep paralysis than just the disconnect in the brain. There may actually be some interaction going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. This could be the real, this could be the real linchpin of alien abductions. I mean, this could be the way we finally begin to understand it as objective and subjective at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, this sleep paralysis, instead of being shoveled, shoved to the side by, the nuts and bolters, at the same time, it's being, pushed as the answer by the skeptics. I mean, maybe this is the real thing that brings both views together.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, sleep paralysis definitely plays a part, but it's not like they think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And my takeaway from the whole thing would be that no one who is involved in any of these subjects, and I don't really care at this point what it is, anything that is unexplained, that is not, what were the or what were the origins of, ethnicity X or Y or Z. Anyone involved in non-materialistic speculation cannot deny that these things are not connected, and cannot close themselves off to the possibility that sleep paralysis might have a lot to do with spirit phenomena, might have a lot to do with alien abduction phenomena as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the other takeaway is really that we are closer to these things than we think. That they are just a hair's breadth away from our everyday reality.
Yeah.
And truly, it is an altered state of consciousness. No matter what is actually physically going on in the brain, what it is an altered state. Just like if you took DMT or something like that and had other, experiences where you're experiencing what seem to be objective entities.
The soberest person in the world has experienced altered states of consciousness. Just the way it's just a human condition.
Yep.
It seems to be a fundamental part of the human condition. I want to get back to this, what we were saying earlier, that this seems to have been, this could have very well have been the trigger of religion in human culture, not the typical materialistic explanation of caveman seeing thunderbolts falling onto the ground and saying, oh my God, the gods are right. Maybe these are reasons that we started to believe in angels and demons and gods and whatnot.
Sure, and if you're living in a cave or sleeping out in some kind of shelter in the woods, you're not having the bedroom experience, but you're seeing these beings come to you while you're sleeping, and they're communicating with you or scaring you or helping you in some way and then going away. I mean, who knows how they reacted to them?
Yeah, maybe maybe this is the reason why they started to paint in the caves, to try to fend off these entities.
Right.
Well, consider with our culture, we take anything like that as negative. Ghosts are scary. UFOs are here to hurt us. Bigfoot wants to do whatever Bigfoot wants to do to us. So anything we don't understand, we immediately put into the scary, harmful category.
Yeah.
But maybe back in those days, they didn't. They felt like this was the spirits talking to them and they needed to listen. So maybe they didn't have negative experiences with them, or if they did, they tried to learn from them.
Well, and I've often argued, and that not to spin us off on a separate tangent, but I've often argued that the concept of the second sleep that was very common in ages past, where people would wake up in the middle of the night and spend that time awake and in prayer or in contemplation, might actually be a defense against this sort of phenomena too.
Oh, that could be as well.
Yeah, maybe this entity, we are perceiving the phenomenon in such a negative way because maybe these entities are trying to shake us up from our current state of slumber. I mean, if you are riding along to a person who is driving up and you see that he's falling asleep, you're not like saying, hey, wake up. Being gentle. You shake him up, you slap him and say, hey, man, check out,
That's a
wake
great
up.
Love that.
Good analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
I two takeaways personally, and that is the kind of more prosaic one is that if it turns out, or if we want to go along with the idea that sleep paralysis opens the door to these bad things that come and scare the crap out of us. Well, first of all, we must be pretty powerful because they've yet to kill. I'm knocking on wood. Several layers of wood right now. But most people get scared, but they do wake up. And so these things might be terrifying, but they don't seem to be able to actually puncture the barrier and get through and drag us to hell like I felt this thing was going to do to me. And the second is I kept thinking of Rudolf Otto, who was I think a Lutheran theologian, and in the early 20th century, and he's the guy that coined the term numinous. When we talk about these entities or these sorts of experiences, but it gets kind of misused now compared to the way he used the term. If for him, numinous is a confrontation with the other, and the other can be terrifying. I mean, the other can be demonic. It can scare the living hell out of us. Because it's so alien to us. We don't understand it. It can be that same other that we meet in like a profound spiritual experience, but it's that, I think he coined the term the mysterium, the tremendous and fascinating mystery, but it's also terrifying. Like when you see the face of God, like the Hebrew prophets, they would fall down in terror. Ezekiel seeing the wheel. I mean, all these. When you break through and you see God or the other or the mystery, it's not always a pleasant experience. So these numinous experiences of sleep paralysis, while they feel very demonic to a lot of people, maybe it's just an expression of something bigger that just terrifies us because it's different. And I'm sketchy on going with that because my own personal experience is it did not feel holy, in any way. It feels absolutely dark and malevolent and evil. But maybe that's what the other seems like to us.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But if we entertain the existence of evil and darkness and shadow, that also denotes the existence of light and goodness.
Yes.
There cannot be one without the other.
You are a mystic, Red Pill.
and to add to that, maybe one brings about the other.
Exactly.
Yep.
I tend to think that there are two sides of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, overall, I'd recommend people check out The Nightmare.
Yes.
It was an excellent docu-drama. And as I said, you can find it on Netflix. I'm sure anywhere else. I don't know who released it exactly, but it didn't seem like it had a huge budget, but it was done exceptionally well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Sarai, definitely let people know about your forum that you just opened, and I'll get to. I would love to hear stories from anyone who's listening who's had,
for sure,
particularly interesting, scary or otherwise sleep paralysis. Bring it on.
So yeah, I'm going to put up a thing in the forum that people can conversate about this. You can tell your stories in there if you want. If you'd like to tell your story on the air, you can shoot me an email. I think it's stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. It'll be in the contact section of the website, which is wheredidtheroadgo.com. And if I get a few of them, I'll do a little separate show just on night terrors and sleep paralysis stories. I know I had one. I think it was the last listener stories. The pastor or the priest. He wasn't a priest. I think he was a pastor. who had the sleep paralysis where it pressed him down into his couch, and he found out later that two of the slats underneath the couch had gotten broken from it.
Wow.
So again, you had another physical type of evidence there, because he said, you could have bounced on that, basically you could have bounced on that couch, those things weren't going to break, but he felt it just shoving him down into it. But yeah, so do that, and if you want to talk in the forum, you feel free to add your own forum subjects. There's someone's already put up an entry for guest suggestions, if you'd like to hear someone on the show.
Cool.
Obviously,
Nice.
I can't just get anyone I want. That would be nice. If that were the case, we'd have Jacques Vallée tomorrow.
Donald Trump.
Keep at
Yeah.
it. I mean, you've had, as far as podcasts on this subject go, you've had some of the best guests that I'm aware of. So
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel pretty lucky to have gotten some of the people I've gotten. People I didn't think would ever talk. I've never heard on interviews like Patrick Harper and stuff where I was just like, well, this isn't going to happen, but I'll try anyway. And he was like, sure.
Yeah, nice.
So you never know. We do have, let's see. We have Jeffrey Kripal coming up in May.
all right.
And
Nice.
Michael's going to be helping me with that one since you're very familiar with his work. And that may end up being a two-parter, actually, because I'm guessing that's not going to go quickly.
Should be.
Nice.
I have the author of Illuminations. What's his name? Eric Olay?
Believe so. Yeah. Wallet.
Yeah.
Wallet. Maybe. My French.
Eric Wallet, yeah.
Yeah, my French Canadian's not so good these days.
So in the next couple of weeks, very soon, he'll be on to talk about his theory on UFOs, which is really unique and has more to do with poltergeist phenomena. And some other stuff I'm still working on. Still waiting to hear back from some people.
Nice.
But it should be interesting. We're going to have some very unique guests, and I think Kripal will definitely be a...
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
that'll be a
interesting.
highlight. Yeah.
He's just put out his book with Whitley Strieber, and it's from what I've read of it so far, it's very, very good.
Mm.
All right,
Speaking of-
any last thoughts, guys?
Oh, speaking of good books, Greg Bishop
Yes.
finally released his book, It Defies Language.
Yes.
So if you want to have a conversation with a fascinating guest to talk about
Yes.
UFOs from a completely non-dogmatic, unorthodox point of view, well, I can't recommend anyone better than Greg.
Well,
And
yes.
I would,
I'll have Greg on as soon as I get to read his book. So
and I would interject that someone is being far too humble because Red Pill Junkie did their illustrations for that book. So and
He
they're
did?
fantastic. He did. this Red Pill Junkie fellow. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
All right.
it's a great cover, man.
Thanks, man.
It's a beautiful book.
yeah, it's a very cool cover. All right, so I guess we're done for this week. I thank you guys.
Hey,
And again,
man. Thank
Yeah.
you for giving us the opportunity. It's always
Yeah.
a pleasure.
Absolutely.
And people out there, tell us your sleep paralysis and night terror stories. We want to hear them.